dear Parliamentary State Secretary Dr. Kofler, dear Senator Schwarz, Spectability Professor Ulrichs, dear Mrs. Marilla, dear Professor Sinamata, dear Mrs. Sotoge, dear Professor Feind as the Institute Director, dear Professor Grete, dear Dr. Neubert, dear Professor Hanisch, dear colleagues at the Seminar for Rural Development, and dear guests. The Seminar for Rural Development, or in short SLE, has its 60th anniversary today. This is reason enough to celebrate, all the more because this institution is part of the postgraduate studies of international cooperation. And for 6 decades, it has been training young people as experts in the field of development cooperation. The SLE is hence a hinge between science and practice, which is a jewel at our university and which is important for the fruitful development of our world in this area. My name is Christoph Schneider. I'm the Vice President for Research at Humboldt University at Berlin. I have around 25 years of research background in climate change and adaptation to climate change. So this topic has interfaces with the Seminar for Rural Development, and I'm delighted against this background that I am given this opportunity here to welcome you here and our guests outside. The postgraduate studies is not everything. The Seminar on Rural Development is also working on several other fields. The SLE, for example, does transdisciplinary research together with other disciplines and institutes within Humboldt University in Berlin, and also with other universities, and not least, also with international partners from countries of the so-called Global South. And I think we have to think again whether we can find an even better term for this word, which is politically no longer really correct. For decades, the SLE has been pursuing practice-orientated research on rural development, and the SLE also offers practical training for international experts and executives. Training is offered, for example, in the field of adaptation to climate change, climate proofing, catastrophe risk management, moderation, and conflict and project management in the context of international cooperation. And consultancy services are offered for development organizations and universities in the spectrum ranges from transformation to politics and consulting when it comes to defining curricula. The Seminar for Rural Development today works in all these areas and imparts transformation knowledge in all these areas with a view to the global crises we have to tackle. These are particularly important, and graduates are therefore enabled to carry out transformation work, because the Seminar for Rural Development is set to transform what was theoretically learned into solutions. So we are not looking for problems. The problems appear automatically. We are working on developing solutions. And these problem-solution competencies is what is so urgently needed in this profession. The topics of the SLE are widespread, ranging from issues of rural and agricultural development to food security, rural governance, urban-rural relations, and climate change as well. In order to tackle these tasks in the future successfully, we wish the SLE all the best and a lot of energy, and we thank our partners and the sponsors who supported the SLE over decades and who came here now in order to celebrate with us this anniversary. Especially, I would like to emphasize the presence and the support of the ministry for which Dr. Bärbel Kofler is working for, which belongs to the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and Senator Stefan Schwarz from the Senate Administration for Economics, Energy and Utilities. And we also have today Mrs. Aksana Marela, Director of the international NGO Young Africa Mozambique, and our long research partner of the Seminar for Rural Development, Professor Tuelar Simamata from the Faculty of Agriculture of the University Badjajaran in Indonesia, and Mrs. Daria Sotoge as spokesperson of the activist movement Fridays for Future. All of you, and you as guests anyway, are welcome here in this temporary auditorium, which shows once again that in addition to project support, there's also a basic equipment of universities that need a significant boost, dear Senator. On the 16th anniversary, I would wish the SLE in person and the president of the Humboldt University, our president Peter French, is prevented from attending because at the other side of the meadow, at the same time, there is a reception for the last 2 COVID years of our professorship. So, in the name of all members of the presidency, I wish you a successful future for the SLE that reflects the past decades, that it may flourish and that its work may bear fruit. I personally have a duty here at the reception, and therefore I'm unfortunately unable to attend the complete event here. Please bear with me for this, but nevertheless, it is an honor to me that I have the opportunity today to welcome you here today. And you may rest assured that Humboldt University in Berlin appreciates this treasure of the SLE and that it will support it, especially because we are aware of our responsibility in the world and because the SLE is an important part of addressing this responsibility between generations, cultures, and generations on this planet. And I now pass the floor back to Professor Räthe from the Institute, who will moderate the event from now on. I wish you lots of fun and enjoy the celebrations. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. But at present I have no functions, so I pass on directly to the co-director of the SLE. Thank you. Transforming Development Cooperation, or on the future of development cooperation. Dear Vice President Schneider, dear Parliamentary State Secretary Dr. Kofler, dear Senator Schwarz, dear Director Barela from Young Africa Mozambique, dear Professor Simamata from Patajara University, dear Dean, Professor Grete, and other professors of the Institute of the HU Berlin, dear Mrs. Atudi from Fridays for Future, dear colleagues, SLE alumni, students, and dear anniversary year. This 60th anniversary of SLE is under the motto of Transforming Development Cooperation. Transformation as a term is a little bit outdated, but it is very demanding, in fact, because it is a fundamental and sudden change. And this means that transformation is not a feel-good change. And development cooperation is currently losing importance. This applies to classical understanding because development cooperation must contribute to improving the lives in developing countries. The reason for this loss in importance is a good one. Many countries have increased their wealth, but there's also one regrettable case. Development cooperation still has the flair of paternalism, which it could not get rid of. And this means that development cooperation loses credibility, especially among young people. But let's take a closer look, and then we see that development cooperation has many new tasks. To mention just three: climate crisis, fighting against the pandemic, and parts of the security policy. So all these are issues of a global scale. Tackling all these crises is a task for humankind, and all this belongs to the tasks of development cooperation today. The Federal Ministry of Cooperation, despite its minor importance as it is seen in the general public, is still a super ministry, in fact. But it has relatively limited funds in view of this importance, because we all know that tackling these crises requires not only ideas, transformative thinking, it will also cost lots of money. And we must develop more strategies according to 7-in-1 strike and not just balancing one goal against the other one. With the Agenda 2030 that was launched in 2015, ecological goals were added in particular. So the countries of the North, which are historically and on a per capita basis the causes of the climate crisis, have also become developing countries. This facilitates the presentation a little bit, but increases the scope of tasks further. However, since the World Climate Council in its sixth report in 2022, since it abandoned the 1.5-degree goal and emphasized saying that it's no longer 5 minutes to, but 5 minutes past 12. And this means that we, the countries of the North, have brought the planet to the brink of abyss. Professor Zimmermata from Pajajaran University will tell us more how the preparation for the next hot area, Indonesia, how it feels in Indonesia. We in the North do not know how it works, and therefore we cannot show it to the others. The end of paternalism is really coming. So climate adaptation there is not possible without climate protection here, and this would be definitely a failure. And the idea of a right of catch-up development of the poorer countries was found to be unrealistic. But what do activists of Friday for Future say to this, who have been fighting for this goal so long? How can climate justice be achieved now? Mrs. Suntode will elaborate on this. And feminist development policy also connects to equality issues. Dr. Bärbel Kofler, Parliamentary State Secretary, will comment on this. So to what extent can feminist development policy be compatible with a transformative agenda? And this will also be discussed tomorrow in one of our workshops on real collaboration. Ultimately, it's also important what this means for young people who want to build their future and who have a right to a future. We will talk about rural youth in the South, or specifically in African countries. I'm very happy that Director Oksana Varela from Young Africa Mozambique is here with us, who will explain this to us in more detail. And as SLE, we are also determined that our research and education will become more inclusive in the future, and that people in the South are included from the very beginning. And tomorrow we will discuss with you how we will continue this process and foster it as quickly as possible. Some encouraging experiences were already made with remote tandem teams during the pandemic times. How can development policy be connotated today? The term of global development is booming, but from our perspective, it's ambiguous. On the one hand, it shows that the North also needs to develop. That's good. And that countries in the South also waste resources. That's correct, but it can also eradicate the differences between the disadvantage and the advantage between North and South. And it must be emphasized that the vast majority of the disadvantaged people are living in the South. Today, we even witness, despite all the cooperation, that we have a new hunger disaster where it already happened in the past, and why there is a war in the north. The creation of unilateral dependencies turned out to be a boomerang. Transformative development cooperation should hence look at the relational part of development cooperation and look at the large and remote consequences of our activities. This is what Senator Schwarz will address, and giving some examples from Berlin. Transformative development of the future puts an end to the fairy tale of it is about responsibility, and we know that we do not have enough funds in order to compensate for the damage. Transformative development cooperation does not spare those in power in the south. So some governments that fail to act there, because despite our crimes during the colonial times, we cannot spare them from criticism. And this, ladies and gentlemen, would also be paternalism. Instead, we rely on the pioneers of change, politically, institutionally, and individually, in the South and in the North alike. Our vision is based on joint action, systemic, synergistic, and solidarity. This is how we proceed in the future, even if we fail. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for this great introduction. My name is Harald Grete. I'm a professor here at the Daniel Ter Institute, member of this center and also in the advisory board of the center, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. Well, first we will introduce the panelists, and they'll each give us some impulse for discussion, and afterwards there will be a question and answer session involving current students of our center of the postgraduate study program, so the anniversary students, so to speak. And afterwards there will be an open round of discussion with all those in the public. So now I will ask Dr. Bärbel Kofler, the Parliamentary State Secretary from the Ministry for Development Cooperation. I will pass on the word to you. The floor is yours. Well, thank you so much, Professor Grete. Dear Professor Schneider, dear Dr. Neubert, dear Professor Grete, but dear Senator Schwarz, Ms. Varela, Ms. Sotode, and Professor Simamata, and also dear graduates of SLE, and I would also like to welcome all the participants, all of those involved in the Center for Rural Development. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm very delighted to have been invited to the 60th anniversary. This is something special, keeping this center alive for 60 years and training the people who actually shaped development cooperation in the past few decades. That is quite something. And I heard that there are some participants of the first year of this center present here tonight, and I'm, like I said, very delighted to have been invited. Dr. Neubert, actually, you did a very good job at pointing out all the focal points of this center, because actually I think it's not what many people are still thinking. It's not about helping people, assisting people. It might be necessary to assist people in some cases, of course, but it's more about systemic, structural transformation, these processes that we can shape together with others. It's not like we know everything. We certainly don't. Digitalization is a very good example. I think we all know quite. I mean, for example, when I go to conferences together with partners from African countries, I can definitely state that we're the developing country in that respect. So it's about transformation, learning from one another in this process, knowing that for economic reasons we often don't see eye to eye. You made all these points very clear, and I think it's very important to know all this also regarding our approach in our ministry. You address different points, climate policy, for example. The question is how can we boost social transformation, because when it comes to dealing with the COVID crisis all around the world, then we are talking about transformation, resilient healthcare systems all around the world, establishing those not shaped based on the German model, but thinking about how we can together create resilient systems that are better prepared for coming crises. I think these are the questions that we have to tackle together, because no one state, no one continent can find the answers to this. We need to do it all together. And this is definitely true for the climate crisis. I mean, how could one single country solve this issue? This is something that the whole world needs to work together on. Now, how can we come to just energy transition, forge new partnerships? How can we promote all this? And a very good example of how it can be done, how it should be done from our point of view, is feminist development cooperation. And that's what you asked me to comment on. And I'm very glad, Dr. Neubert, that you asked me to talk about this. Because it's not just about the question. I mean, I can also mention some things where women are where women are underprivileged and things that should be transformed. But it's more, when it comes to feminist policy, it's more about that. It's about a new type of inclusion of all those in society, including all those who have until now not been included in decision-making. How can we shape peace processes, for example, make those more inclusive and thus more sustainable? And you rightly criticized the paternalistic worldview that we all want to overcome. Well, I'll still start with the status quo. In terms of gender justice, how can women all around the world participate in development cooperation? How are they represented? Well, I mean, if you take a look at the statistics, the figures are still quite alarming, frankly. I think in the past few years, all those present here tonight, all of those who work in the field in different projects, we all wanted to be inclusive, have a fair share of both men and women in our projects. But the outcome is not quite as it should be. There's still 130 million girls all around the world who are not being granted the right to education. 130 million, sometimes because there's not enough sanitary installation. Sometimes it's for safety reasons. They can't walk to school safely, etc. 1 billion women all around the world do not have access to the formal financial system. So the question is, I mean, shouldn't we be more critical of the economic transformation system? About 3/4 of the share of unpaid care work and housework is being done by women, and that's certainly also true for Germany. About 200 million girls and women are being a victim of genital mutilation. At least 1 out of 3 women experience either physical or sexual violence in the course of their lives, and we all know that the COVID pandemic even increased those numbers, both here and around the world. Only 26% of the members of national parliaments all around the world are women. And even in Germany, 35% of the new German parliament are women. And that's not actually something to be proud of either. So we too still see an underrepresentation of women in the parliament. The figures are very clear. We're quite far away from gender equality. Also, the Global Gender Gap Report speaks to these numbers of the World Economic Forum. It's not a report by some NGO. You can't it's often said that our ministry is not quite as important as other ministries. No, it's the World Economic Forum report that gives us these numbers. And if we continue being so slow, it will take us another 135 years to actually reach gender equality. I mean, I'm not optimistic enough to think I will live to see gender equality, but it would be nice if the younger people at least would live to see that day, gender equality. And that means we would need a different speed to address all these problems. Because on the one hand, of course, it's about justice, it's about gender equality. How can we make sure all people have the same rights and include everyone? But we also have to see that the results of economic activity, of peace processes, etc., of work in general, is better if everyone's included, especially if women are included. Now, there's a report by UN Women that probably all of you know. They actually looked into the peace processes that included women, the resolution on women and peace, UN Resolution 1325. What happens when women are part of mediation teams, etc.? What happens when the voices of women are heard? That's something that's very important for enduring peace. And this report says that the processes that included women are much more sustainable. The peace achieved that way is much more sustainable and much more effective. That it alone would be a very good reason to actually be willing to include women in all these processes, but unfortunately it's not the case yet. But there are also studies, I think the members of this center are very familiar with those, from agriculture, for example, that show that when women don't just do the work, but have a respectable position when it comes to decision making, then agricultural output can be increased significantly. And that also helps to become more resilient against hunger crises, including women better in all these structures and processes. That's why for us, the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, the gender equality, is also one of the core pillars of our approach to development cooperation, because it also leads to transformation in many other fields and promotes that type of transformation that otherwise would not be feasible. Let me just give you 4 characteristics of human rights based. That's something that feminist development cooperation is. It's about respecting the rights of all people. All people, let me emphasize that. It's not just about men and women. It's about all LGBTIQ inclusions. The other day, I talked to representatives of a group of disabled people who said, yes, we support feminist development cooperation to make sure that the rights of people with disabilities are respected more. So it's about integrating all types of marginalized group, also indigenous people, for example. We need to discuss with them, not just talk about them. It's about including people more based on human rights. Secondly, it's about boosting transformation. Dr. Neubert, you also mentioned this. It's about addressing structural causes of inequality. Also, the role models included there. What are the views behind those types of discrimination? How we can actually overcome the reasons of inequality and discrimination. It's about becoming more inclusive. If it needs to be human rights based, it also needs to be based on inclusion. And we also have to second guess power structures. What are the reasons behind those? What are the types of inequality that actually then promote inequality even more? Well, as for the approaches, the solutions we have, well, we actually copied them from the Swedish approach. I'm mentioning this here because I think we need to pay respect to them. Sweden was the first country to actually start feminist foreign policy. They were laughed at the time. They were ridiculed, and even at the UN level, they were not respected at all for it. But now there are quite a few countries, not only Germany, that has adapted feminist policy, also Canada. France is taking a leading role. There are several European countries that are on board, and I think that's a very good sign. You know, not ridiculing this thing, but actually discussing it seriously. But we also need to go one step further when it comes to the economic system and laws. What are the obstacles on our way to feminist policy? It can't just be limited to talking about it. Of course, it is about rights. And talking about development cooperation, of course, it's also about, for example, discriminatory laws in different countries that actually keep women from being involved, from getting involved, from being heard, that make sure women do not have the same rights. It can be land rights, for example. It's often a huge problem. Only 14%, I think, of land all around the world is owned by women. 14%. Unfortunately, I don't recall how much of the land is being worked by women. I think that it's slightly higher. So that shows you what we mean. It's about empowering those who actually do the work. Let me make that very clear. When it comes to loans, for example, do women have the right to take out loans? Access to the internet, access to education, etc. So it's about changing laws that are still discriminating against women. It's also about resources, so the economic resources, women being able to participate adequately, for example, when it comes to finances. And it's also about representation, because I think that's something we see in many countries. Laws are only changed once there is a critical mass of women present in parliament in the decision-making positions. So it's about these 3 R's that we want to foster in our development cooperation approach. And when we talk about agriculture or rural development, food security, then, like I said before, for example, when it comes to production, the women are usually those who work the fields, who are responsible for the harvest, who take care of the cattle, who also sell many of the agricultural products and produce, who transport it to the markets, who actually have to travel to and from the market. And how can we make sure that they can take out loans for the agricultural business? How can they have more access to knowledge, to education, to technology? How are they paid, if they're paid at all, in agriculture? Land titles, land rights, only 14% of the land is owned by women. We have to talk about property structures. And if we see that those who work the land, who actually bring in the harvest, are at the same time, for example, women who are at an age where they can become pregnant, where they bear children and then breastfeed children, they're particularly affected by hunger, then we see that there's something going quite wrong there, something that we need to tackle and we need to solve together. And this inequality has to be overcome. I'm not saying that the projects that we have until date are worth nothing. I mean, I know many people are very enthusiastic about, for example, fighting for gender rights. That is already being done, but we also need structural change. We need to actually embed it in our policy making, in conversations we have, negotiations we have with other governments. And it's also about what a ministry says is necessary in terms of which projects receive financing and funding. I mean, how much attention do we have to pay to the gender question in all these projects that we're financing? And I think we can really become better. I know many good projects. I visited GIZ in Bonn last year, and there was the Gender Award, and we saw that there are many good projects, but for me it's not enough. At the project level too, we are lagging behind, we're not good enough. For example, a few weeks ago, I traveled to Niger, to a rural project. It was a good project, but it was about groundwater storage, and actually collecting rainwater to strengthen the groundwater level and for irrigation. It's good. It's also about adaptation to climate change. But then I talked to the women there, and I asked the interpreter to ask them how their what they think about the project, whether their lives have improved. And it actually took me quite a while for the interpreter to understand the meaning of my question, not for linguistic reasons, but because he didn't understand what I was getting at. Well, I said, I mean, it's usually the women who go to collect water, isn't it? So has anything changed for the women here? That's my question. Have their lives become easier? Do they have to walk less now to collect water, etc.? And then finally the interpreter got my question and translated it, and the women were looking at me and saying, well, nothing has changed. And they said, well, no one's talked to us. So actually, I mean, that was quite frustrating for me, because I didn't think I would get such an answer from the women there. I mean, it was a German project funded by Germany. And so I think at that level too, we are lagging behind. Something did not go as it should have gone. It was quite a good project, don't get me wrong, but something still went wrong. So that is something that I think we have to promote. And there are some very technical issues involved here. For example, earmarking funds for gender equality projects. So we need to make some changes there. And the women there also told me, well, they want a project that focuses on them alone, that opens up new perspectives for them, for the women, that gives them new possibilities for new education, so they can actually improve their lives. So that's something we need to do. And that's, I mean, for example, we also want to foster projects that focus on the education of women in agriculture. When it comes to registration of land titles for women, that's another goal of ours. And then we have a very important program that focuses on the food security for women and children in Sudan. That's a project we have in Sudan, and that's something we want to keep working on. For example, are there cash transfers for women in dire need so that they have their own income to improve their food security? So a lot needs to be done. I mean, other countries are doing quite a lot. Canada, for example, 92% of public development cooperation needs to have gender equality as at least one pillar. So that's quite something, actually. And we're quite far away from such figures, we have to admit that. That's something we want to improve. When it comes to promoting cross-cultural topics, and also, I mean, when we talk about this difference in gender equality, we need to come to a point where women actually do stand a chance. We have to try to close that gap and need to invest more in this direction. We want to act fast and swiftly. We have started to talk to the civil society in the past few months, invite people, representatives of civil society. At the end of the year, of course, the senator knows how it's done. We will prepare a strategy paper. We will finalize that, and we'll have a clear plan for action, and then actually start with specific steps to execute our plans, also to actually assist our people, our colleagues in the different countries. And what's always very important to us, we want to do it together with our partners in different countries. Just one example, lately there was the African German News Week, very exciting project, because it actually meant we asked young people in both African and European countries about the most important topics when it comes to development cooperation. What do they expect from us? And rural development was very important to them. Digitalization, climate, of course, that goes without saying. And they also mentioned appreciation, that, you know, it's not the people from the global north can't just say, we know how it's done, we'll do it for you. That's something they just want us to stop. And I think if we collect the knowledge and the experience of young people, that will actually help us promote our programs. And let me also seize this opportunity. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay here for the entire evening. I will get in trouble with my boss if I don't return to another event we're holding. But I want to thank all of you who are dedicating your professional lives to development cooperation. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm. You've been so committed. You've achieved a lot. And as for the graduates, I wish you all the best for the future. And we are sure that you're all motivated, enthusiastic people, and you can change the world to the better. We need you for that, so thank you a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. State Secretary, for this inspiring presentation. You said you have to leave soon for governing, so we are happy that you took your time. But we have time for one question. You mentioned the term of feminist development policy. You put it on a very broad basis, and you said we have not yet come there, but it's not only about gender mainstreaming and gender justice, it's also about breaking up power structures, not only between genders, but also between social and cultural groups within countries, and breaking up of power structures between countries, in particular between what we are calling the global north and the global south, for lack of better terms. My question is, shouldn't we take one step further and say feminist development policy? The entire development term could also be rethought, because at present we are thinking in economic terms. We talk about economic development. Feminist economics would say this obsession of traditional economic science to look only at the economy and economic efficiency and economic growth. This is a very strong restriction. Don't we need a different perspective of development, where it's also about social reproduction, about caring activities, about caring, about motivation for social references, for social integration? Would you say this is also part of the term feminist development policy? Well, to me, the question is not to talk about economic context. This is important because it has also to do with power structures, and at the end of the day also it has something to do with the money that is needed to finance all these transformation processes. It's also about social structures, social coherence and cultural possibilities and cultural inclusion. So when it comes to social work, maybe we should think whether I could really understood the idea. Let me put it like I understand it. We have the famous 75%, during which women do unpaid caring work, and it was required that this is changed to become paid care work. And this is something I would support, and this is also what I understand by this, because it's not possible that it's only nice to have if women do it in addition. But this work is not valued in whatever form. But it is also a contribution towards the fact that those who do the work can attend education, that they can earn money, or that they are even prevented by law to own land. If you combine this, it's extremely important, and we can also subsume this under feminist development policy. All the transformation process should not be seen economically alone. So consider the debate about climate change. Of course, what happens economically to the factory X in province Y that goes off stream next year, and how can we get the energy that is necessary for production? Of course, it is important, and this is the goal. Carbon emissions are important and must be considered, and the ecological impact must be considered. But what is a matter, of course, here, we should also see what is the impact on the people. Just recently, I forgot the name of the city. I read in a South African city where 40% of the income is generated by coal mining, and what we urgently need is a transformation of the energy industry. And then we must think what will happen to this 42% of the inhabitants of this city in order to do this in a sustainable way. So the question that those people are included who are affected by decisions, I think this is crucial, and therefore social issues are a core momentum, and therefore the question of social protection, the momentum which we currently have, was different. 10 years ago, everybody believed we take out private insurance, then everybody is covered. And now we have a certain momentum where we talk about the need for social basic protection worldwide, no matter where. It has a lot to do with COVID over the past 2 years, because we saw that it brings societies to the brink or even beyond. So we need a protection system in order to enable societies to survive this. And this momentum which we have, we must manage the transfer, that we understand that social basic protection in every country and no matter what the cultural characteristics, but this is an important element, and we cannot say somebody can afford, others cannot afford, but this is very crucial to have this, and this is also part of it. It has a lot to do with transformation, also away from some neoliberal market concepts. Thank you, Mrs. State Secretary. And please, our greetings to the Parliament, and our thanks for the long and good cooperation with Humboldt University and the SLE and the decades of support. Thank you very much. So let's come to the next impulse. Senator Stefan Schwarz, Senator for Economics, Energy and Utilities in Berlin, and he's talking about the nice topic, development cooperation is coming north and to Berlin. What does this look like? Mr. Senator. Dear Vice President, Professor Dr. Schneider, dear Dr. Neubert, dear Professor Dr. Hanisch from the SLE, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, my sincerest congratulations on the 60th anniversary of SLE with its unique international postgraduate studies. Our long commitment in the federal state of Berlin for SLE, together with the federal ministry and Humboldt University, pays off every year again and again. Young people who study at your institute are perfectly prepared for the profession of international cooperation, and at the same time they also experience some international, diverse, innovative and cosmopolitan city. Our partners in the world get well educated, methodologically and analytically fit and interculturally competent people for international cooperation. What is particularly noteworthy is that 85% of graduates go directly into their professions, and this is in fact a good score, and I can only say congratulations on this. The city of Berlin and my Senate administration supports the successful work of SLE and likes to support this and will continue to do so in the future, because the need for cooperation in order to manage the many international challenges may be more obvious today than ever, and Berlin too can, must and will make a contribution towards this. The title of my input is Development Cooperation Goes North, and I see it this way, that when it comes to implementing the goals for sustainable development, we must always be aware of the fact that living, consuming, working, earning money is also subject to planetary limits here in Berlin, because what we do here on site has repercussions on the world which we must better understand, which we must support, and of course, which we have to consider in our everyday activities. Some examples of how we in Berlin implement the Agenda 2030 in Berlin and through Berlin. Let me give you a few examples of this. First of all, when it comes to climate protection and the sustainability goals, Berlin has set itself a very ambitious goal. Berlin, as a federal state and as the capital city, tries to achieve this goal earlier than is required by law for climate neutrality. So in 2030, carbon emissions will be 30% lower than in 1990. The Senate is determined to achieve the reduction goals for individual sectors and wants to determine these, and the Climate Committee must report and check at regular intervals every quarter whether these goals are achieved in buildings, energy and transport. So we have committed to a very high binding nature, and we also gave a clear commitment that wherever we fall short of the goals in our monitoring, that we will have to readjust our policies. As agreed in the coalition agreement, Berlin, under my colleague Jarasch from the Environmental Administration, is also determined to adopt Berlin's sustainability strategy, and we also support this by State Secretary Biel, who you already met earlier, with the Advisory Council on Development Cooperation. And we will also make a very sustainable contribution to this. Second, and this is an example that comes specifically from business, in Berlin we have a coordination office for energy efficiency and climate protection. At the very beginning of this legislative term, this was very important to the Senate of Berlin, that it is part of our 100-day program. And in this case, we want to support companies on their way towards sustainability, and we want to develop these companies. The larger companies in Berlin and also the state-owned companies, the utilities and the transport companies, they already have sustainability strategies and goals. In the case of smaller innovative startups, sustainability strategies and goals are very often also part of the business models. But there's also a gap which is relatively large in the case of a business structure like Berlin's, and these are the classical medium-sized companies. And this is where we want to work specifically because we see major challenges that have to be overcome here in order to achieve Berlin's sustainability goals. And this is why we set up this coordination office for energy efficiency and climate protection, the purpose of which is supporting small and medium-sized enterprises on their way towards sustainability when it comes to planning, implementing, and identifying energy-saving potentials, when it comes to opening up new technologies, specifically for renewable energies, for identifying support and subsidy options. Imagine a small and medium-sized company often does not have the resources that are necessary in order to specifically adopt a binding sustainability strategy. And here this is where we work specifically and where we want to make an important contribution towards achieving emission reductions. Third example is in trade. Our goal here is that supply chain responsibility is supported. The Senate Administration for Economics supports the network for sustainability in Berlin and Brandenburg. We want to change the existing structures towards economic activities that focus on the well-being of humans and the environment. For example, that a business takes full responsibility for the supply chain of its products and also pays attention to human dignity on the part of its suppliers, no matter how far away these suppliers are. Or companies are also supported in terms of participation and in-company co-determination of employees in order to set up these structures, or that companies offer only products and services which abide by planetary boundaries. And fourth, and now we are here, this is the Federal State Office for Development Cooperation, which is part of my ministry. Berlin supports with this Federal State Office for Development Cooperation a variety of development policy projects, topics, and stakeholders, with a focus, for example, on topic-based alliances and partnerships, also in cooperation with Berlin's districts and the civil society, and it specifically addresses the global development goals of the UN Agenda 2030. The Federal State Office supports global learning and the understanding of global justice and solidarity, and we also support Berlin's districts in projects from the District Fund for Development Policy and Sustainability. This is a very broad-based topic, from a fair procurement via awareness raising for the topic of post-colonialism, right through to sustainability concepts in the districts, which is the second administrative level and therefore very important as a hinge to the urban society. And we also have an exchange of experience as part of city partnerships with the Global South, for example, on the topic of promoting and supporting women and issues of food security. There are many examples which we also work on together with the Federal Ministry of Cooperation, that this is a promoting program where experts work in different development policy topics in Berlin. They give impetus for globally responsible and interconnected thinking and acting. They address all the global topics in the general public and thereby create multipliers. This is specifically about strengthening global learning, also in digital formats. And I think here in Berlin, as a startup metropolis, we have special competencies in this area. And We have projects that address global solidarity in neighborhoods. And of course, we also address urban transformation from a development policy perspective. Berlin Global Village is a center of migrant development policy, civil society in Berlin, but it also radiates out of Berlin, where important development policy stakeholders are interconnected in Berlin. In the direct neighborhood with the Berlin Global Village, we have the Impact Hub, which also supports sustainable entrepreneurship. And we have the Coordination Office, Decolonize Berlin, which is in charge of addressing Berlin's colonial past and managing the consequences with cooperation with the partnership in Windhoek. Berlin is determined to support the reconciliation and compensation with Nama and Herero and their descendants. Reporters Without Limits, we offer a scholarship program for persecuted digital journalists in order to support them in security aspects. You see that quite a lot of very specific action is taking place in the city, basic elementary work, because we are convinced that Berlin must take responsibility. This is also part of the transformation. And with this example, I wanted to show you that the development cooperation must take place here in full responsibility. And this is what the Senate supports. I wish you and I wish us continued good cooperation. And I think this cooperation that has been underway for 60 years should be developed further. And I look forward to the next 60 years and more. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Schwarz. Stay with me here at the panel. I stay here as well, so you are not alone. Here you can take your seat in the middle. Thank you for this impressive presentation, and especially the presentation, the description of the impressive bouquet of commitment, of development policy commitment of a relatively small federal state that does an exceptional job. And also in the name of the SLE, I thank you for the very long and very good cooperation.
Which is Oksana Varela, Director of Young Africa Mozambique, and she holds a presentation with a very nice title, The Future for the Rural Youth. Please, the floor is yours.
Dear Mr. President, dear Dr. Schneider, herzlich willkommen. Welcome. So I would like to welcome all of you. It's a great honor for me to be here and to be able to speak at this very prestigious event. I would like to congratulate SLE on the work you have done, and I will seize this opportunity to, together with you, to tell you a bit about the responses that we're finding in Africa, especially to address the concerns of young people in Mozambique. It is our experience that it's a very good way to empower young people by educating them and by helping them to get integrated into the labor market. We not only give young people the practical skills they need to become independent, but we also provide them with the social skills that they need to be able to live, to take over responsibility of their own lives and live in dignity.
Interrupt you for a short moment. I see that some people are desperately searching for headsets, and I find it too much of a pity if you can't understand. So we just take 1 minute's break. Raise your hand if you want to have a headset, and there are people walking around and giving you a headset, because this presentation will be in Portuguese.
Yes, okay, no problem.
Yeah, wait a moment.
Yes, no problem.
Okay. I think most of the people are settled now with headsets. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. Dizer que o nosso grupo-alvo são
Thanks a lot. So we focus on young people between 15 and 30 years of age.
a mulheres
And we pay particular attention to the ambitions of girls and young people with disabilities or young people with HIV infections. We pay special attention to girls and women because in Mozambique we see that, for example, a father with 4 children, if the first 2 children are girls, then the third child is a boy, then we know that the third child, that boy, just because he's a boy, is more likely to get an education, more likely than his 2 older sisters. That's in our culture. And Young Africa tries to tackle these issues by particularly addressing girls and young women and focus on them. So 55% of our funds are granted to girls, while only 45% of the funds are given to young boys and men. We're talking about gender equality, and it's really important especially for underprivileged girls and women to be supported. It's usually the men that are privileged in all societies, so that's why together with our partners and sponsors, we particularly support girls and women. Every year, Young Africa supports more than 2,000 girls in various regions of our country. In our center in Beira, we have training programs for trade and economics, and in Dondo, there are training programs for agriculture. And as for our mobile courses, there we offer both types of educational programs. Our training programs last from 6 to 12 months. And our education model means 70% practical training and 30% theory, so classes. And we also have a franchise model. So all the programs, the different types of programs that are being led by young people. So young people then train other young people. That's how young people get the opportunity to actually become entrepreneurs themselves. That is our model, the model we use to make sure that young people can inspire other young people. And we have 4 complementary courses in our program. We have computer classes, giving young people computer skills so that they can write their own application letters and CVs, for example. After the start of the training program, we saw that many multinational companies are coming to Mozambique, but it's hard for them to find skilled workers in our country. That's why they were not able to employ our youth. So these types of training programs are very important to make young people more employable, to increase their chances of getting a job. We also teach life skills, which is truly important. They need to become competent. They need to be able to raise their voices. We've heard about that tonight. It's very important. The lady who spoke before talked about one of the projects that in the end didn't manage to achieve what had been promised. In African countries, we do want to give women a voice. We want women to be able to participate. We want them to be included and be decision makers. In Mozambique, we often hear, well, I'm participating in this decision, but if we take a closer look at what's actually happening, then we see that it's not actually true. For example, a couple wants to build a house. So the normal process is that the husband decides what will be done. For example, let's have new tiles in the bathroom. And what would the wife do in Mozambique? Well, she would say, my husband decided what we're going to do, but I participated in the decision. But it's not true. The women are only being informed of what's being done. We want to change that. We want for women and also young women to be able to participate and actually take decisions themselves. So this is very decisive. These are decisive points that need to be addressed for our young people. Also, when it comes to the labor market, we teach them entrepreneurial skills, and that's important for young people to get more opportunities. So if they don't find a job, for example, on the regular labor market, which is very difficult today, for example, also due to the COVID pandemic, the labor market is very dire, not only in Mozambique, but also in other countries. So that is why we find it very important to teach young people entrepreneurial skills so that they can actually start their own businesses. Young people need good training, practice-oriented training. That way, the young people we train will be able to say, yes, I do have a job, even though the labor market is very difficult at the moment. So that's why we're trying to teach young people these entrepreneurial skills, so that at the end, all those who participated in the program will have some kind of job, whether it's on the the formal labor market or whether they started their own businesses. We try to teach them how they can actually find a job or become self-employed. We also have an inclusive approach. We also train young people with disabilities. 290 young people with disabilities have participated in our program last year. Our entire infrastructure has been modified to adapt to their needs. For example, we built ramps in both Beira and Dondo. So now young people in wheelchairs or with other disabilities can participate in our programs. Also because they did not get the opportunity to actually access other institutes, other buildings where there are training programs, just because there were no ramps, for example. Young Africa has adapted to training people with disabilities. It will be even more difficult for these young people to find a job. It's very difficult just because there is a lack of access. But it's not just that. Because on the one hand, we do have laws requiring equality, treating people equally, so that offices and companies are required to employ young people with disabilities. However, in practice, it's not the case, not very often. That's why we actually handed out start-up kits to those young people so that after their training, they won't return to being marginalized. So it's like an optimistic sign for them, an optimistic signal so they can actually start their own businesses maybe. We also have computers that are particularly equipped to the needs of those people. We have computers with certain kinds of software. So, for example, if someone who's vision problems and can't actually type, then the computer program can translate what was written. So that's, I mean, maybe for you in Germany that's a basic requirement, but for us that is luxury, piece of luxury equipment that is not available in many places. We as Young Africa put a lot of work into this to make sure that young people with disabilities can participate in our programs and actually find new reason for hope. Well, what we found important in the field of innovation, we needed to found an employment guidance counter. And when young people come to our institutes and start one of our courses, or want to start a course, we first try to find out what their strengths are, where their interests lie. And our counselors actually accompany young people in this entire process to actually find out the best way for them to find a job. We have mobile training programs as well. In other provinces of our country, in many communities, it's important for the young people there who have hardly any other opportunities there. That's why we started the mobile training programs. One of those districts is Cabo Delgado. In Cabo Delgado, we're seeing a political conflict at the moment. Unfortunately, there is a war going on there. And our institute, our organization, what can we do for young people there? Who are the people waging war there? Well, it's young people too. But why did those young people decide to actually follow one of the war-raging groups? Well, probably because there wasn't any other opportunity for them. So we as Young Africa were active in Cabo Delgado. We have our mobile training unit there in order to be able to give young people a different opportunity, to give them the choice so that they don't feel like they have to enter this war, join one of the war-raging groups, but find a positive perspective for their lives. We also have ISAL saving groups. It's not easy to teach young people to save money, especially regarding the situation in our country, but they have to learn how they can save money so that they won't rely on others to start their own companies. We also have a dual education program, so for a while they work in a company, and then they, for some other time, they go back to school, and at the end, they pass the exams. Young people are very much dependent on support. Well, our young people need some sort of help, a helping hand. Young people have to learn that vocational training or professional training is very important to stand a chance in the labor market. So let me close my presentation here. I would like to thank you so much for your attention, and I'm very sorry that I spoke in a language that is for you quite hard to understand, but it's the only language that I am able to actually share with you properly what it is we're doing, because otherwise I would only be able to tell you half of the story. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Oksana. Take a seat. I think here is your name board. And no, sorry, we have a perfect translation, so there is no problem. We all understood you perfectly well. Thanks a lot for your inspiring words with a strong focus on education. Maybe later in the discussion we can also address a little bit what is needed in society at large. What do we need in terms of framework conditions to allow the youth to participate more in societal decision processes? I think that's a topic not only in Mozambique but also in Germany. Some of you may be panicking because you look at the clock, you look at your watches, and you see at the end of the program there is barbecue and a reception with drinks. And then you see that there is still something between you and that barbecue and drinks, and I can accommodate your concerns, because the directors of SLE told me before that the written program was somewhat too narrow, and we would have half an hour more, and this doesn't mean that there would be no sausages anymore or no beer anymore. There will still be, also if we are half an hour later, and if you listen well, you may also be glad to be inside, because inside it's dry. And with this I invite the next speaker. Professor Tuala Simamata is a professor for soil biology at the University of Pajajaran in Indonesia. And he talks about preparing for hot times. What does that look like? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Dr. Christoph Schneider, Professor Harald Greter, Dr. Susanna Neubert, Senator Stefan Schwartz, and Barbara Kopfer, and other distinguished speakers, and also, of course, all the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the second talk I will discuss with you is about the topic already there here, is preparing for the hot time in Indonesia. How does that look like? It seems that the temperature in Indonesia is getting hotter and hotter. So if you compare the top picture and the low one, 2070 to 2020, the mean annual temperature in many parts of Indonesia is increasing significantly from 25 degree to 9 degree, maybe more. This is the mean annual temperature. The next slide, please. We can see here the status or the current status of climate change in Indonesia. Indonesia with 275 million. I don't know how much the population now in Germany. Together, maybe close to 100. Yeah, that means Indonesia is more. And yearly, we produce around 5 million people. It's like the same with the population in Singapore. And Indonesia also consisted of 17,000 islands with coastline close to 90,000 kilometers. So if you take Lufthansa flying over, you need 90 hours. Yes, if you don't believe it, you can try. Yeah. Then Indonesia also facing a serious dilemma between how to produce enough food for rapidly growing population and how to protect the environment. most of the people believe that agriculture is a victim of climate change. On the other side, the environmentalists said also the climate change is a victim of agriculture, but not the victim of Indonesia, of course. Yeah, at a long time, because Indonesia, they have more transformed the primary forest on the, and secondary forest to the plantation. It's of course that means the climate change is our victim. But nowadays, since the 10 years, the conversion of the primary forest and secondary forest is not allowed. So now you try to convert the degraded land to become plantation or to become forest. It's positive. You may give big applause, please. Yes. And then you see, we're facing at least the climate change in Indonesia is real. The rising of temperature is clear. The seawater rising, as you see here, the erratic precipitation, unreliable, flooding, and also some what we call salinization. Most of the rice field along the coastal area is already 50% salinized. We have a big problem. And of course also flood and extreme weather. This come because more and more we experience in Indonesia. The next slide, you see the portion of the people of Indonesia exposure to the climate change. Simply, most of the people, about 64%, is affected. And then the next slide, we can see that the climate change give a significant effect on the agriculture production. A change of 1% degree decrease the food production, especially food crop. In Indonesia, the main food crop is rice. And sea level rise about 60 centimeter, only 60 centimeter, will decrease significantly of production also. In some, we lost the agricultural soil. The average of sea rise level in Indonesia is about 8 millimeter per year. So to reach 60 centimeter is no big deal. Then next slide, please. We come to the estimation of the loss of production. Here you can see here the highly significant rise, maize and also soybean. The increase of temperature, the increase of and flooding increase the production significantly. So now we come to the conclusion. The first conclusion: climate change is real and threatens the livelihood of the smallholder agriculture practice. Because the smallholder normally live or reside along the coastal line. Then this means consequently the sustainability of food security in Indonesia is also in danger. The second conclusion: integrated mitigation adaptation are urgently required to reduce the greenhouse gases and to increase the carbon sequestration. So not enough only adaptation, also must combine with the mitigation. The third, adopting the climate resilient sustainable agriculture, increase the soil health, input and water efficiency, crop productivity, farmer adapted capacity, and therefore the resilience of smallholder farmers. This part we have together with Humboldt University for 5 years in Indonesia, in 2 districts. One is Pangandaran in Java, and another one is Cilacap, and another one in Toraja. Through here, the climate field schools were able to improve the soil fertility and increase rice productivity and the capacity of smallholder farmer. So, in my mind, or based on our experience, to increase the farmer capacity is the key point of adaptation. Because the farmer, they stay there. The farmer is local expert. They experience the whole climate change, the whole day life. So we have to learn from the farmer. So that's why in our motto, the farmer goes to campus, not the farmers go to the farmer. And the participatory action research are important innovative strategies to increase the resilience of agricultural system and the smallholder to deal with the changing climate. As a closing remark, climate change is real, no border. So the climate change, they has global passport. They can go everywhere. Yeah. No customer. Unlimited. My pass, I come to Germany only 2 weeks. Arbeitet nicht zugestattet. But the climate change, they can do everything, whatever they want. So, you see, this climate change threatens the livelihood of mankind, especially the smallholder. That means, consequently, those are our responsibility. So that means the climate change is the global responsibility, not only one country. Like in Indonesia, normally every week we produce more haze because the farmer just burning, and the haze go to Singapore, to Malaysia, export, yeah, free of charge. Yeah, because they do not have any border. And then, ladies and gentlemen, you may believe it or not, it's not easy work how to deal with the climate change. But we are working together, we can manage it. I thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Professor Simmer-Martin. You showed to us the burden of climate change which is experienced in Indonesia. Probably if we would express that economical, their per capita burden of climate change on the Indonesian population is substantially higher than the burden on the German population. But if we look at the causes for climate change, I looked it up. In Indonesia, we nowadays have roughly a carbon footprint per capita of about 2 tons of carbon dioxide. And in Germany, we still have about 8 tons of carbon dioxide. So we are still, after all the talking of decades, causing substantially more climate change per capita than the Indonesian population. But the Indonesian population is carrying substantially more of the burden. And maybe in the discussion we can also talk a little bit about what is kind of split that is if we experience that we still find it difficult to reduce our meat consumption, to agree on a speed limit or that kind of things, while we have such an unequal distribution of the burden. And this leads me naturally to the next speaker. The next speaker is Daria Sotode. Und dann wechsle ich auch wieder ins Deutsche. Sie ist Pressesprecherin.
Now I'll switch back to German. She's the press spokesperson of Fridays for Future, and she'll be speaking on the topic of climate justice now. Very nice title, short and succinct. We're very happy to welcome Fridays for Future here today. And if we think of who actually created the most stimulus to bring this topic on the political agenda, then I can certainly say we're sure that Fridays for Future has been much more important than many of the scientific reports that we've been writing. I mean, they're necessary too, but at a certain point, there has been enough There have been enough reports, and we can just keep piling those reports, but at a certain point we just need to start acting. That's why organizations such as Fridays for Future are so critical. Ms. Sotoudeh, the floor is yours. Hello everyone, thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Daria Sotoudeh. I represent Fridays for Future. I'm happy that our movement was invited to this event. And I'll tell you a little bit about this very succinct title. I think my presentation will be somewhat shorter than some of the others. At least that's what I hope. Well, first of all, it's about climate justice, not just climate protection. That's why Fridays for Future has been underlining. And what does that mean? I think many of you know it means that it's not just about the natural science part of things. It's not just about reducing emissions. If we say we want to fight the climate justice sustainably, it's also about talking about the problems we see in society and thinking and addressing these issues when we talk about fighting the climate crisis. Is it better now? Okay. Well, let me know if there are technical issues. So that's something we need to talk about, because the climate crisis is not an isolated issue, but because it is connected to many problems we see in society. Specifically speaking, for example, when we talk about measures, we need to keep in mind that they cannot actually increase social inequality. For example, if prices rise, of course, it's a very complex issue. We need compensation of certain kinds, whether we are talking about the German or the international level. One of the main reasons is the actual cause, the root causes of the climate crisis. We're talking about the problems that are being reinforced now. Well, the climate crisis started with the exploitation of nature, the exploitation of people and resources, driven by growth, and very few people got very rich by exploiting and suppressing other people. Structural discrimination such as racism, sexism, and many other types of discrimination are still present today, and they were established a long time ago. That's why it's important that if we fight climate crisis, we also need to fight the root causes, be it regarding to the measures or be it regarding those injustices by themselves. And we as Fridays for Future, well, Fridays for Future is a global movement, and that's why we also have to ask ourselves, what does that mean for our movement, for our international cooperation? I'm very glad that tonight we're talking about different topics and different aspects of the problem. This is a very constructive discussion. Now, I can tell you it's also being discussed a lot within our movement. As Fridays for Future Germany, we have to think about our role, our responsibility. We have to talk about the privileges we have. And of course, we represent a very wealthy, quite safe country that has a colonial past, that has a certain responsibility, even today, and that's also reflected in our activism. It's important to see the reality in other countries. Other countries are affected much more by the climate crisis than we are. And though the countries that suffer the most are usually the ones that contributed to least. We have the term most affected people and areas, MAPA, and are the people most affected by the climate crisis. And in many of those countries, there are climate justice movements, there's activism, there's Fridays for Future groups in many other countries, and it's important for them to be heard here in Germany, to be heard in German politics. It's not just about Germany and our future, it's about people who are suffering today. They're suffering because of what we are not achieving to do today. And the activists from MAPA countries are some actually started the fight against the climate crisis even before we were aware of it, and they're still leading this fight because they were the ones that laid the foundation for our work, and it's very impressive from my point of view. That's why for us it is critical to be in contact with our counterparts all around the world and to work out our requests together. Requests need to be made at all levels. We can break them down to the regional level, the national level. And that's why we're asking upon the German government to do their best to meet the Paris agreements, if that's still possible at all. And Germany needs to be completely carbon neutral by 2035, getting all its energy from renewable sources. And at the global level, it means that colonial continuities need to be shattered. And until this day, many MAPA regions that used to be colonies, that used to be suppressed, are still dependent on countries of the global north. We're talking about financial dependency in particular. That's why Fridays for Future is internationally calling together with MAPA activists for reparations to former colonies and for the cancelling of debt to break with this pattern of ongoing dependency. Thank you. That was it. Thank you so much.
Ja. Vielen Dank für Ihren Vortrag.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. Now we'll move on to the next part, namely the discussion with the current graduates. So please let me know whether you want to ask your questions from the floor or whether you want to come to the front so that you will be seen on camera. Maybe we can get you a microphone here, or maybe you already have the mics. How will we do it? Well, you will need a microphone. Okay. All right. Who would like to start? Who of our group? Don't be shy. Well, all questions are welcome. Well, I'm not a lady, but I might be representing some other groups. Well, I have so many questions, actually. On feminist development cooperation, unfortunately, I can't ask those questions at the moment. But, for example, as for the last topic Ms. Sotode made, Dr. Neubert mentioned before the topic of catching up development, majority word versus minority word, to enter some new terms into the discussion and terms that are already there. So to what extent is it just to actually leave the room for development in the global south? Well, or can we tell them, well, I mean, your development is difficult now. Of course, we exploited you for many years, but unfortunately, your development is not possible now, also due to the climate crisis. Is it actually possible to do this without a paternalistic view? The question is addressed to both Ms. Sotode and all other panelists at the same time. Well, we have a microphone over there. Okay. Now, maybe I can start. Well, first of all, I mean, I'm not an expert in this question. I did not study it. From the climate justice point of view, I would definitely say, or also based on my own experience, that development does not necessarily mean a climate wrecking damage on the climate. I mean, development, of course, usually means in the industrial type of industrialization we saw in Europe, which of course is very climate damaging, of course, but I think there are also many other types of development, versatile development, that can also be done in a carbon neutral way. And I think that in some countries of the global south, we will actually find types of inspiration that we can learn from in Germany. Well, maybe to complement this, I mean, when it comes to climate justice or catching up development, it's about the thought that there is still a remaining emissions budget, and that should be given to the countries of the global south because they need more time. And that's what's so horrible about it, actually, that, I mean, we've long used up this budget. I mean, we just can't believe that this sort of development catch-up is still possible. And maybe climate justice can interpret it such that, for example, if we have a European Green Deal and work together with African countries, maybe we can say it's not about us benefiting from it by getting green energy, but also the countries in Africa themselves, they should be able to transform their energy, make it green, and use that green energy themselves. Of course, that is all very costly, and I think climate justice now is possible via financing.
Thank you. One note to the group of students. Senator Schwarz has to leave soon, and just like the state secretary, he has to do politics at the Bundesrat. And therefore, once again, please note, if there are any further questions to Herr Schwarz from the students group, and of course, today there are important legislation was adopted in the parliament, including legislation on the energy transition, and there is still need for discussion. Tomorrow I will represent the federal state of Berlin in the Bundesrat, and I still have to discuss it with my colleagues. So please accept my apologies that I have to leave soon. However, I would like to come to the question regarding the topic of climate justice. I believe what we are currently witnessing also in business is a complete paradigm change. It's no longer climate protection. Climate protection is no longer seen under pure cost aspects, but also under competition aspects. And I think we have understood that specifically in Germany, and we feel this here due to this horrible war in Ukraine and the resultant consequences for energy supply. This is something we have to be concerned about in Europe. We feel that our competitive advantages in global competition were established due to an unfavorable energy cost situation in our favor. We have to adjust this. And this also helps in the justice debate and fairness debate at times where we have disruptive changes in the economy. And there we also have the opportunity when we cooperate. If these disruptive developments managed jointly. In Berlin, we do this in many partnerships with India, for example, or with entrepreneurial partnerships, because we think that we can learn from each other how to manage this disruption and the necessary transformation in business, and how we can manage this better together so that at times of transformation that is driven by climate protection, we can build competitiveness. We see this in the field of renewable energies. At a very regional level, we see this, that interestingly, the federal states in the north of Germany are extremely competitive because they have renewable energies. Previously, Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg in the south, they had the industries because we had the nuclear power plants in the south, so we had the energy supply there, and now the way the development goes in the opposite direction. It's a complete paradigm change. So to stick with the old terminology, we were the developing countries in Germany, so in the east and in the north, and those in the south, they were the powerhouses. And this changes due to the transformation, the large relocations that we are seeing, be it the gigafactory of Tesla or the chip factory in Magdeburg. They are not here by coincidence. And factors like this have a role to play here. And therefore, I believe it is a tremendous opportunity to create this transformation and to create wealth in federal states and in countries where it's not yet the case today. And we can achieve this with financial support, but also and specifically by joint learning, by joint development of an understanding of that economy is transforming dramatically, and if we can manage this together, we can compensate for part of the inequality. Thank you very much. Well, I just watched the students. Do you have any further direct question to Mr. Schwarz? Then please be brief. I see one. Hello. Thank you, first of all, for the interesting and exciting impulses. The Dr. Kofler, Parliamentary State Secretary, talked about a feminist development policy. And I would like to hear to what extent the Berlin Senate is also thinking in that direction. And we talked a lot about that development now arrives in the north. And do you also include this feminist aspect? And do you already have concrete or specific measures to implement this? Thank you. I think the approach was very plausible, as reported by State Secretary Kofler. And in Berlin, I have to look it up. It was written down for me. I'm still quite new in office, and I do not know all the measures so far. But in our cooperation, specifically as part of the impact, I think that this is some kind of project between the federal state and federal government and federal state governments that we support founders. This is done, especially with regard to founders, which is very important, especially for Berlin's economy, because you do not have to look at other countries or the global south, that there is still injustice and imbalances. You can see this from the numbers of founders we have here in Berlin. 30% founders, women, 30% share of women in the founder scene is not enough, and the more it's technology orientated, the lower this number, the smaller this number, and for the real big tech startups, women account for less than 10%, and the Berlin Senate is committed to adjust this. We just earmarked 8 million euros 2 weeks ago in the parliament because I found the impact now. It is a project in India where we have networks to support Indian women and where we bring them together with Berlin-based women entrepreneurs. So this is a focus, but it can be developed further. This is just an example that was written down for me, but I think it's extremely important because just like the projects which we heard from Young Africa, everything that has to do not just with education, but also with encouraging people to become independent. This gives an enormous boost. And of course, we don't have to look at the global south only. We also have to look at women here, and we must encourage them because they have many special obstacles to go into the foundation business. And I think for every society, it's important to reduce these obstacles. These are economically based, these are socially based, and they are no longer so much regulatory based, but it is not enough. It must also be done at a cultural level by creating platforms, networks, and also by spending money. What we also do, we also support founders, female startups with money, because they are still underrepresented. So please, I have to leave now. I already received a call. I regret this. So an applause and thanks to Senator Schwarz. Any more questions from the students, please? Good evening. My name is David Püker, and I have also a question regarding feminist foreign and development policy, and I would also refer to Dr. Bärbel Kofler's presentation. The example she gave from Niger was very impressive. So a project, as I understood it, that was very up-to-date. It was not primarily about women's empowerment. It was a water project, I think. And women were completely disregarded and ignored in this project. My question goes to Dr. Susanne Neubert and to Mrs. Oksana Varela. Mrs. Neubert, please, I know you do not represent the Ministry of Economic Cooperation, but you know the structures and the setup of the BMZ projects. How can something like this happen in today's time? And Mrs. Varela, what would you say very specifically? How would projects have to change, or project designs, how would they have to change in order to prevent this from happening? Thank you very much. Well, of course, I do not know the specific project, but I believe it's also due to the structures, very clear, and it is difficult that women are heard and that they are involved in the processes in a creative manner, and that they also go ahead, because women tend to be reluctant, as Mrs. Varela also hinted at. And then this can happen quite easily, because this has to do with politeness and respect to German development cooperation is very high, and the expectations, hopes, and sometimes the experience. Because experience is often quite good, because Germans are on site for a long time, which is very much appreciated. And then comes hope, and then people wait and are very polite. And now I have to pass on the microphone. How can it happen, and what are the next steps? Doesn't this lead to enormous frustration if it fails? Women are very frustrated. Women are certainly, in order to answer this question, the question asked by the student, specifically, how can this be designed? I believe that the first thing we can do, or what one should do, is research in that region or area already. Women must be integrated in research and which ideas, which business they are doing there, what their ideas are. So women are integrated in the first place so that the facilities and the implementation of the project can be carried out with the inclusion of women. So what do women need? What do they want? This must be the basis from the very beginning in order to influence the development of the project. And I think the results of these projects will then be much better because the answer is given there by those who really feel the needs or the necessities.
Are there any further questions? Well, thank you so much. I have a question for Professor Simamata. You talked about course research.
Yeah, I will ask in English. Maybe that's easier. Okay. Sie haben über
Well,
Co-Research
you talked about core research, and you talked about
oder die Zusammenarbeit.
the collaboration of both researchers and people who work in practice. What role can this collaboration actually play to achieve better climate resilience? So what I mean is, how can co-research between people who work in practice and researchers improve climate resilience?
Thank you very much. So basically, we done the research based on problem solving. So we sit down, discuss together with the farmer that we call participatory research, and we identify what is the main problem. And then we try to find a solution and to inform eine research or demo plot. This research will be done by the farmer. They measure it like doctorand by university. So the farmer will collect all the data, analyze together with us, and also in some extent we did some publication. What do you call it? Yeah, sometimes my Deutsch come with her. It's so long hair. Yeah. So in this case, we try to, normally in our country, the farmer do not come to the campus. They do like, what they call, like a high term. So I don't know, in Germany, I think the farmer is usually come to the campus. But in our country, maybe also in Africa or another country, so only one way. So nowadays, we try the campus, the farmer come to campus. So in May, we did an agriculture expo. So the farmer, they saw all that they learn from the university, and the student or the other professor will learn from the farmer. So the conclusion is actually the farmer is really expert. The farmer is not stupid. Yeah, much better than us, because if you are the farmer never go to pensioner, never go to the renter. Yeah, they did that the whole life. They experienced the whole life. So actually, I think it's the good idea together with my Dr. Silke, also LSLA, that we did together with the farmer research. So the farmer is a co-researcher, or the professor is the co-researcher of the farmer. And also we did some international publication together with the farmer. So that's all. Thank you very much.
It also seems that we have a common denominator here. If you're really interested in a group, which may be the co-researcher, which may be the farmer, or which may be women, or which may be the youth, then you involve them very early on in your planning and decision procedures. Yeah? More questions?
Guten Abend.
Good evening. My name is Jan Sommer. Thank you very much for inviting us to this very interesting event. I am a participant of the 60th graduation year, and I'm about to enter the development cooperation world. And we're hearing many buzzwords, eye level, working at eye level, but how can all that be put into practice? How can eye level work if one side has the budget, has the funds, and is able to make decisions, and the other side doesn't? How can we include those people that will be affected by the decisions? What if the people affected want something completely different from the agenda of the countries in the north? And we will go to Cameroon, for example, in our research project to do research on land use rights in a national park. And BMZ has plans to put 30% of the land mass under conservation. And I think the people who live there are probably not particularly interested in protecting elephants, but they're interested in being able to do the agricultural work and make a living. How can we deal with those dilemmas? How can we do this without being paternalistic and bring all those different things together? Well, of course, I think it's extremely difficult to do everything correctly, but it's about a particular mindset. That mindset being that we can't weigh one goal against another. We need multifunctional approaches to land use. For example, on the one hand, conserving nature, and on the other hand, using the land. So, for example, having forms of agriculture that at the same time promote biodiversity, carbon capture and storage, thus protecting the climate, also protecting the climate by planting more trees, having more forests, and maybe even creating a higher productivity rate compared to one-dimensional use. We need to move away from one-dimensional approaches towards multi-pronged approaches. When it comes to agriculture and cattle raising, there are many opportunities. There's not just multifunctional approaches to enhance agriculture, but there are also concepts to promote peaceful coexistence. And that will actually yield much more benefits and reduce conflicts. It's about transformative thinking. That's something we have to learn ourselves. And for people in other countries, that could also be a new way of thinking, new mindset, and creating that together must be the goal. And of course, we need to believe in it to actually walk down that road. We need to give the best we can to achieve our goals. Maybe one more question. Well, I actually have a question myself. I'm not just here to pass on the mic, but I'm also a participant of this year's study program, what I noticed was that several times we've heard the claim that the countries of the global north are also developing countries but I'm a bit critical of this statement. I'm afraid that the discourse might shift in the wrong direction that way, because not all countries are equal. Not all countries, especially those in the global south, are privileged and have access to financial means, not in the way that European countries have that kind of access, countries in the global north in general. So, I mean, development cooperation is part of a system, and how can we make the system more democratic so that countries of both the global north and the global south have just access to knowledge, to infrastructure, to financing? How can we achieve that? Well, I was just given the microphone, so I'll try to answer your question. But I'm sure that other panelists will have something to contribute as well. Well, I mean, I never actually saw it that way, that we could call countries of the global north developing countries. This was the first time I actually heard this statement. I think it depends a lot on how you define development. And I think there are two different trains of thought of how we can raise awareness here. Well, I do understand your thought that it's problematic to claim that, because it actually makes the existing inequality a bit more blurry. But what was your specific question again? Sorry. Well, I mean, the question is, how can globalization become more democratic? So how can we eradicate the privileges of the global north so that we can actually promote sustainable development in the global south? I mean, it's also, we have to second guess the system, don't we? Yeah, that's how I would start too. I think on the one hand, there's the financial basis. We have to make sure that all countries have the same access to financial resources. And I would like to underline here that we need to pay compensations. For example, we ask for compensations that have to be paid to countries that are still suffering the ramifications of colonization. We're also calling for debt cancellation to actually put countries in the global south in a position where they're no longer dependent on other countries. And also, I think we should not go to other countries thinking that we have to achieve climate protection in other countries, but we have to work together with local partners to bring together social justice and climate justice, and there are valid approaches there. And I think I would say that countries of the global north, in these countries, awareness needs to be raised, and we need to do away with the thought that we are at the forefront of climate protection. We have the best ideas, and I think it has to be a continuous process. Inequality has been there for centuries, and unfortunately, it can't be eradicated overnight. Anyone else?
It was really fantastic. You had difficulty entering into it, but then you came to the point and then you can go into further detail. But now I'm a little bit in the conflict to think, on the one hand, it is a great discussion and a great panel, and we could continue for long. On the other hand, I also think that some of you may think of the barbecue that is drying out now. My proposal would be that the discussion with the students is terminated now, if you agree, and that we go to the open discussion that will also be moderated by a student, Felix Bornheim, so that the audience will also have the possibility to ask questions for 15 minutes, 10 minutes to 15 minutes, and then we will close, so that we can then also have a drink and a snack. Do you agree? Great. Then I pass the floor to Felix Bornheim. Good evening. So I see many requests for the floor. As students, we could ask questions now to ask all the experts here on the panel, but I think in the audience there's also quite a lot of expertise and that you are waiting because we cannot hear all the questions. But nevertheless, we would like to give you the opportunity that everybody makes a short contribution, not just verbally, but also in writing. We will come to the questions a little later. But first of all, I would like to invite you to take your mobile phones, please, if you have them with you. And you will shortly see a QR code on this screen, or you can also go to slido.com in your web browser, enter the code SLE, and you can then enter one or two keywords for your opinion, for contribution on the topic, how this transformation in development cooperation can be carried out. Just a short moment. I just try to solve the technical issue. Here we are. So you see the QR code, scan it, or enter the internet address slido.com and the SLE code there. And just enter one or two keywords regarding what you can contribute to the question, how can the transformation of development cooperation work in concrete terms? But now we can also answer your questions. Let's start over there. Thank you. My name is Günter Gräshusse. I was a participant in the 12th year. So I have been watching the Institute for 50 years from a more or less far distance. So the question is, why does the Institute still exist? And I congratulate you on your existence, and I know well, and the manager, Bernd Schubert, and Peter Neunhäuser, and many others, and of course you, above all, they all know why this Institute still exists, because we fought for this, because there were phases when we were very close to the abyss, and I'm happy. And all the politicians left as usual. And I'm happy that Professor Grete is still here, that he can listen to this. This institute was at the brink of being dissolved in the 1990s. This was connected not just to the transition in East Germany, it also depended on what we discussed today, the topics that were important in the Ministry of Cooperation. And in the 1990s, agriculture was unimportant. We said we don't need it, we dissolve it, we close the shop. There's a mess in Berlin anyway, so we don't need them anymore. And what was just discussed here is also paternalism from Mrs. Kofler. Unfortunately, she left. I know her very well when we are on business trips. But if you go to the countries and say, we have to do something, and what do you do there, and why aren't you involved, then this is paternalism. Because nobody had visited that village in order to really understand the structures. And I would warn you, my experience is the following. Government negotiations are pending. Then the partners ask, what is the current topic at you? Then we say climate. Okay, let's do a ministry for the environment. Then we get money again. Or we say women. Okay, then we do some women's projects. And this climate change suffers from the development countries because it's not based on partnership aspects. And I have to address Fridays for Future. Go to India and ask the Indian government why it looks at this world as it looks. And then they tell us, you did all this fuss. And then you come to us and say, you need wind, you need renewable energies, and you have to build all this. Fine. Okay, start in your own country and give us a good example, and then we will build partnerships. I have many other topics. I'm not going to bore you with this, but be cautious. When you set topics in these countries, this is a highly sensitive matter. It requires a lot of permanent feeling in order to properly understand this. Read Michael Lüder's book on the Hindu Kush, then you see more what you can do wrong. Thank you. Thank you. Are there further questions? I see several. I think the first request for the floor, I'm going to ignore it because we have also women who request the floor. So the lady over here. Good evening. I'm from a sister institute of SLE, which is the former DEE, German Institute of Development Policy, that was just renamed Aldous Institute of Development and Sustainability. And I have a question to our two female colleagues from Mozambique and Indonesia. I would like to know, do you have experience with cooperation with education and training institutes from the Global North, which then do research projects in the South? And if so, do you still consider this to be an adequate way of doing research with partners from the Global North? Or is this also some kind of paternalistic development cooperation again, which must be sanctioned? And how would you like to see it? Thank you, Mrs. Varela. The floor is yours. Fine. Here in Berlin, is the Young Africa Mozambique. We are here in order to exchange experience with the training centers here in Berlin. For us, it is a very good experience. We heard a little bit what the others are doing. And now we will implement certain things which we consider to be useful. Sorry, the interpreters do not have the and in fact, I appreciate this research component very much. I would like to know what the others do in order to start activities in our country. Their suggestions would be welcome here. Thank you.
Thank you. So basically, as a professor at the university, and we're working also closely with the farmer, we have to have the cooperation also Zusammenarbeit. Ohne Zusammenarbeit, das geht nicht.
It doesn't work without cooperation.
Question is, how is their cooperation? Based on the last 10-year experience with Germany, the colleagues from Germany come to Indonesia, not come to dictation, but we come together to the parliament to look on the problem and try discuss with the parliament or also with the colleague from Germany what is the main solution. If the parliament agree, then we going on. So basically, that's I think a good cooperation. In addition, with our cooperation, also many of our students also joined this research and graduated from this cooperation. For example, with ASLA, we have produced one doctor, right, and several master, and maybe more than 10 diploma. So I think it's very positively. Thank you.
I would like to add something. It depends strongly on the donor. For example, in the Ministry of Education and Research, if I get finance for an integrated project with many partners, then financing is unfair because all the money is kept by the German universities, and then monies are given to the partner universities, and the accounting procedure is very complex and I would say very unilateral. The universities do get money, but they do not get any power to decide how the money is spent and what it is spent for. And therefore, I think there is a lot that can be made more fair and just, and how this can be considered better. And these are projects by the Ministry of Education and Research, where there is no experience and where this thinking, this way, this mindset has not been installed in order to have a level playing field and to research without paternalism. And this is incredibly important. And if you then look at the partner, then you already have a problem. And I think this is also the reason why many of these research projects sometimes lead to these communication problems. This goes without saying. And therefore, I would support a revolution of this so that these joint research projects can be financed accordingly. Then I would propose we take one last question. I was a participant in the third year. We were 12 students, 12 had applied, and 12 could take part. And they were all men, all the 12. And in the upper floor, there were 2 secretaries, but the scientific collaborators were all men. And now, in the last years, as far as I saw it, the majority of participants are women now. And on the upper floors, there are hardly any men any longer. So this is something I observed, and you may have missed it. The 25th year was the first with more women, and now we have the 60th, and all the years were more women. So the participation of women in development cooperation, as far as SLE is concerned, is tremendous and successful. Thank you. I think it was a good closing statement, and for the last closing statement, I pass the floor on again to Herr Grete. Thank you. I have a task now that you wrote it down in the program, Susanne and Markus. I will be unable to fulfill this for two reasons. We have been sitting here for too long, and it's much more interesting for you to talk to the panelists here in the informal area. And second, it's impossible because the task is summary. And it was much too inspiring and much too broad-based for this. And therefore, let me just say two sentences. I think the key conclusion is the term development must be rethought in many respects. And if we rethink the development term and development cooperation, we saw many examples of this. We are on a good way, but we also saw that there is still a lot to be done. So there are many reasons for this. On the one hand, this is because development goes far beyond economic development. The renaming of the DEE was mentioned. Sustainable development is mentioned there. If you include the social dimension in sustainability, then you get a complete picture. Further reasons, the old role models no longer work. The South develops, the North is already developed. We heard many examples. It doesn't work that way. The young learn from the old. Well, dear youngsters, this does not always work either, and especially for the large transformation tasks. The old guys can learn more from the youngsters than the other way around, because they have the drive to think that something is not normal, what the old ones consider to be normal, and so forth. This was, from my perspective, a great event. Thanks to the SLE team, the students who organized this. Thanks to the fantastic panel. And I wish you and all of us a great evening. But before I stop, Markus Harnisch is going to say a few more words on organizational issues regarding food, drinks, and tomorrow. But once again, an applause especially for the complete panel.
Hello? Mr. Moderator, may I have 10 seconds time? I'd like to hand over my special gift from my dean to the director of SLA.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, of course.
Dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends of the SLE, yes, we've made it this far. The first in a series of events is over. We from the SLE would like to thank you all for participating so productively, for taking the time, for discussing the anniversary topic with us today in such an open and substantive way. But mind you, this is only just the beginning. Tomorrow we'll have a huge program. We will tomorrow change our location for the event center Alte Münze at Molkemarkt and elaborate with you starting from 9 a.m. at Mission, individual areas in which transforming development cooperation can be felt and experienced. Topics like co-learning and consulting, real collaboration, future of development cooperation, transformative value chains, food choice experiments, high-level critical discussion of the export of democracy using the example of the Afghanistan debacle, our well-prepared intergenerational dialogue, children's workshops with experimental contributions from Cameroon and Bali, and much, much more. So tomorrow evening, starting at 7 p.m., there will be something to eat and drink, and ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, students, friends, families, we invite you all for a new edition of the already legendary SLE parties. You might know what I'm talking about, being from the 5th or the 3rd or the 2nd SLE cohort. So yes, we developed that also a little bit. Despite all of our today's crisis, our Center for Rural Development, SLE, Center for Rural Development, looks at what it's doing with confidence and self-assurance with over 1,000 alumni in the professional field at our site. We would like to celebrate this with all of you tomorrow evening, acknowledging that much remains to be done in the area of development cooperation. Dear all, before I release you to enjoy the foods and drinks outside, and I hope we don't have to swim over after hearing all this rain, I have to make a little announcement. Please have a look at the back of the hall now. These people there, where are they? Up here. These people who all wear those black aprons with green lettering would be delighted if you join them at some point today or tomorrow. They conduct food experiments, and you are all subjects and objects of research in them. So help them. Please take 5 minutes of your time later tonight. Promise they will generate interesting results to be shared tomorrow. So from now on, we pause for thought, and I would like to invite you to have a glass with us here at the HU campus, and I have a few bites to eat with us. Follow the crowd. 300 meters left from the exit, you will find the Alte Schmiede and the barbecue place. If not, just follow me. I would like to thank you, everyone involved. Let's hope for no rain, and thanks again tomorrow. We will meet at Molkemarkt, don't forget, and cheers. Thank you all. Goodbye. See you over there.